Imagine standing in a crowded market nearly 4,000 years ago. A caravan has just crossed the dry roads of Anatolia. Donkeys carry bundles of expensive cloth and lumps of tin, the metal needed to make bronze. The journey took weeks. Guides had to be paid, animals had to be fed, toll collectors waited along the road, and thieves could erase the entire investment in a single night. Now the merchant finally meets a buyer. The cloth is inspected, the tin is weighed, a price is agreed. The buyer takes the cargo, but no coins appear. There are no banknotes, no credit cards, and no electronic balance to transfer. Instead, a scribe presses marks into wet clay. Witnesses watch. Seals roll across an envelope of clay, and the valuable cargo leaves the merchant's hands. So, what, exactly, has he been paid? The easy answer is barter. We are often told that before money, one person traded wheat for a goat, the owner of the goat exchanged it for a tool, and the toolmaker searched for someone willing to offer cloth. It sounds logical. It also turns the ancient economy into an exhausting chain of accidental matches. The farmer must find a potter who wants grain at the same moment the farmer wants a pot. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants. Money appears in the textbook story as the brilliant object that ends the inconvenience. But the historical record is much stranger. Barter certainly existed, and people have swapped goods in almost every age. What archaeologists and anthropologists do not find is a simple world in which entire societies depended only on endless spot trades until somebody suddenly invented money. Much early exchange happened inside relationships, not between isolated strangers. Within a household, food did not need to be sold to every child at dinner. A neighbor could help repair a roof because another neighbor had supplied labor during harvest. A family might give livestock at a marriage, support relatives during famine, or provide a gift that created an obligation lasting for years. The return did not always arrive immediately, and it did not need to be the same object. Memory, reputation, kinship, and status kept the account. These were not markets in the modern sense, but neither were they random acts of generosity. A person who continually received and never returned anything could lose trust, allies, and access to future help. The balance existed even when nobody wrote a number beside it. This is the first secret of trade before familiar money. Payment did not always happen at the moment of exchange. If two people expected to meet again, they could separate the delivery of a good from the settlement of its value. One person supplied grain today. The other returned oil after the next pressing, labor during the next building project, or an animal when the herd had grown. That is closer to credit or reciprocal obligation than to immediate barter. It solves the double coincidence problem by introducing time. You do not need to possess exactly what I want today if I believe you will provide something valuable tomorrow. But memory has limits. It works in a household and perhaps in a village where everyone knows who kept a promise. It becomes fragile when a city contains thousands of people, when harvests are stored in enormous institutions, or when a merchant travels hundreds of miles from home. The larger the network becomes, the more dangerous a spoken promise becomes. People forget, they disagree, they die. A stranger can disappear. And once goods cross several hands, nobody can remember every favor that produced them. Long-distance trade therefore needed something more durable than goodwill, but that something did not have to be a coin. It needed a shared measure, a record, and an institution capable of making the record matter. Southern Mesopotamia offers one of the clearest windows into this transformation. Its growing cities needed timber, stone, and metal that the river plains did not provide in abundance. At the same time, large temple and palace estates collected crops, managed land, employed specialized workers, and distributed supplies. Their problem was not merely how to swap one object for another. It was how to compare thousands of different deliveries and obligations. How much barley had entered a storehouse? How much beer should a worker receive? How much wool had been issued to a textile workshop? Who was responsible for the missing amount? The need to count helped turn damp clay into economic memory. Some of the earliest tablets from Uruk, dating to the late 4th millennium BCE, are administrative accounts. They record goods such as barley and malt, not epic poetry or royal biography. Writing would eventually preserve laws, prayers, literature, and astronomy, but one of its earliest powerful uses was bookkeeping. Clay was cheap, abundant, and surprisingly durable. A reed could make numerical impressions and signs while the surface was wet. Once dry, the tablet could remember quantities more reliably than any official. A city had created a memory that could outlive the people who made the transaction. Yet, a record alone cannot compare wool with dates, copper with labor, or a donkey with a jar of oil. For that, an economy needs a unit of account, one common language in which unlike things can be valued. Mesopotamian societies often used barley and weighed silver in this role. A shekel was originally a unit of weight, not necessarily a stamped coin. In one major Mesopotamian standard, it represented roughly 8.4 grams, although standards could vary by place and period. A contract could state a value in shekels of silver even when the person did not hand over a neat round object called a shekel. Silver might be weighed from pieces, rings, ingots, or other forms. In some transactions, the account could be calculated in silver and settled with another acceptable good. That distinction changes the entire story. Coins are objects. Money is a system of measurement, payment, and obligation. An economy can have prices without minted currency. It can calculate a debt in silver without moving silver on the day the debt is created. It can distribute barley as a ration, value property in a standard weight, and carry balances forward on clay. If we define money only as the coins in a purse, then these people appear to be trading without money. If we define it as a shared unit that measures and settles value, then money is already present, not always as a thing, but as an accounting relationship. Consider a farmer who needs seed, food, and tools months before harvest. He cannot exchange the grain he has not yet grown. A supplier can refuse him, or the supplier can deliver now and record what will be owed later. The obligation might be expressed in barley or silver and include an additional amount for the time and risk involved. At harvest, the farmer settles the account from his crop with another commodity or with silver if he has obtained it. The original exchange required no simultaneous barter and no minted cash. What made it possible was a future claim that both sides recognized in the present. This system did more than rescue an individual farmer. It allowed an entire seasonal economy to operate. Agriculture produces at particular times, but people eat every day. Tools break before crops mature. Workers need supplies while buildings are still unfinished. Credit bridges the gap between production and payment. The account lets future output secure goods in the present. In modern language, a credible promise can support exchanges inside a trusted network, but it also creates danger. A failed harvest can turn an ordinary obligation into an impossible debt. A powerful lender may seize collateral, labor, or property. The technology that expands trade can also expand control. The clay tablet, therefore, carried more than numbers. Mature contracts could name the parties, state the amount, establish a deadline, identify witnesses, and preserve seal impressions. Tablets could be enclosed in clay envelopes whose seals helped reveal tampering. A document did not magically force anyone to pay, but it gave a household, temple, merchant association, or court something specific to enforce. It converted two competing memories into a public claim. When a debt was settled, another document could acknowledge payment and void further demands. One surviving old Assyrian tablet, for example, records that a silver loan had been repaid, lists witnesses, and declares further claims invalid. Ancient commerce needed receipts because ancient merchants could argue just as fiercely as modern ones. Now return to the caravan in Anatolia. Around the 20th and 19th centuries BCE, merchants from the city of Ashur operated a remarkable long-distance trading network. They traveled to commercial settlements in Anatolia, especially Kanesh, at modern Kultepe in Turkey. They carried tin and textiles north and sought silver and gold in return, while participating in the copper trade within Anatolia. The surviving private archives are enormous. Roughly 24,000 cuneiform tablets from Kanesh document letters, contracts, accounts, loans, partnerships, family instructions, disputes, and the costs of moving goods by donkey caravan. These records destroy the image of ancient trade as two strangers silently swapping sacks in a primitive market. The merchants calculated investments and expenses. A surviving caravan account tracks silver invested in tin, textiles, and lapis lazuli, then records costs such as clothing and wages for guides, donkeys, equipment, and fodder. Profit could not be known by staring at the cargo. Every cost incurred between Ashur and Kanesh had to be remembered and deducted. A merchant needed accounting because trade was already a process stretched across time, distance, and many participants. The network also depended on households. Merchants abroad wrote to relatives and business partners at home. Textiles could be produced and prepared by women in Ashur, sent with caravans and sold in Anatolia. Agents received instructions. Partners argued over prices and shares. Couriers carried information in both directions. Trade moved through family relationships, but family affection did not eliminate calculation. The letters reveal urgency, suspicion, negotiation, and complaints. Kinship supplied trust, records tested it. When goods reached Kanesh, payment could take several forms and several stages. Silver was extremely important, but it was commonly weighed rather than counted as uniform coins. The merchant needed scales, weights, and confidence in the metal's quality. A buyer might pay immediately, owe a balance, or arrange settlement through another person. A claim in one place could be connected to assets or partners in another. The tablet was not itself a coin that anyone could casually spend. Its power came from the named obligation, the witnesses, the seals, the legal setting, and the continuing relationships behind it. This reveals the second secret. Before standardized coinage, trade was expensive because trust was expensive. Every transaction required more information. Is this weight accurate? Is this silver pure? Does the buyer own what he is pledging? Will his relatives honor his debt? Is the messenger reliable? Which local measure is being used? Can a court enforce the agreement? A modern price tag hides these questions. An ancient trader had to answer them one by one. Weighing metal solved some problems and created others. Silver was durable, divisible, and valuable enough to carry over long distances. Unlike grain, it did not rot, and unlike cattle, it did not need food. But every irregular piece might have to be weighed. Purity could be uncertain, scales could be dishonest. Regional standards could differ. A tiny error repeated across a large shipment could consume the profit. Precision weights from ancient Mesopotamia show how seriously these societies treated the problem. Their mathematical systems could calculate fractions far smaller than the amounts most daily trades would physically require. Barley worked differently. It was essential, familiar, and measurable, making it useful for rations, obligations, and some payments. But it was bulky and perishable. A worker could eat it. A merchant could not conveniently carry a caravan's entire value in grain across a continent. Silver was portable but scarce. Barley was practical but heavy. Credit was light, but only as strong as the promise behind it. Early commerce did not select one perfect form of money. It combined several imperfect tools according to the transaction. This is why the phrase, trade before money, is useful only if it creates a question, not if it becomes a literal claim. There was no single morning when humanity stopped bartering and started using money. Different societies used different mixtures of gifts, reciprocal duties, commodity exchange, institutional redistribution, debt, weighed metal, and other valuables. Cowrie, shells, cloth, salt, cattle, cacao, and many other objects have served monetary functions in different places. Once an object is widely accepted to measure or settle value, calling it not money merely because it is not a coin hides more than it explains. Barter still mattered. It could appear in exchanges between people without a continuing relationship, in frontier trade, during monetary shortages, or when a currency collapsed. Even monetized societies barter. But barter does not have to be the universal childhood of money. In many communities, the first question was not, "What object will you give me right now?" It was, "Who are you? What do you owe? And who will make you honor it?" Exchange grew from social relationships as much as from objects. That created an invisible border around every trading network. Inside the border, members knew the measures, recognized the seals, and feared the same authorities. A promise became credible because people understood the rules. Outside it, the same clay marks might mean nothing. Long-distance merchants crossed these borders through trading posts, using relatives and agents, joining diasporas, carrying trusted weights, and submitting disputes to institutions both sides recognized. They did not merely transport products, they transported a system of credibility. The real obstacle to trade was therefore not the absence of coins, it was the absence of shared knowledge. A seller needed to know the value of the offered payment, the identity of the buyer, and the probability of enforcement. A buyer needed to know the quantity and quality of the cargo. Both needed a way to compare today's delivery with a future settlement. Money reduces these information costs, but so can repeated dealings, standardized weights, written contracts, witnesses, and courts. Ancient trade expanded when these mechanisms worked together. Suppose the merchant sells 10 units of cloth to one buyer, tin to another, and purchases copper from a third. But if the participants keep accounts in the same unit, some obligations may be offset. The merchant may owe one partner while another customer owes him. Instead of transporting the gross value of every trade, the parties may settle only the remaining balance. Credit can support more trade than the stock of payment material physically present in the market. This is an astonishing power. A city may conduct transactions valued at far more silver than sits on its tables that day. The same unit measures many promises. Debts mature at different times. Payments flow through agents. Goods leave before final settlement. In effect, credit lets commerce continue without immediate settlements. The limit is not simply the amount of metal available. The limit is confidence that the accounts will eventually close. Confidence, however, can collapse. A caravan disappears, a harvest fails, a buyer dies, a ruler changes the official standard, several debtors default at once. Suddenly, merchants who accepted promises need actual settlement, and the network discovers that claims are not the same as silver or grain. The economic difference between a good year and a crisis is often the difference between obligations that can be rolled forward and obligations everyone demands be paid now. Trade before coins could be sophisticated, but it was never frictionless. Imagine that the payment date in our opening transaction has arrived. The buyer produces no silver. He says the copper he expected to sell is still trapped in another town. His own customer has failed, so he asks for more time. From his perspective, the problem may be temporary. From the merchant's perspective, partners in Ashur are waiting, caravan costs are already paid, and delay is itself a loss. The tablet now stops being a quiet record and becomes a weapon. Witnesses can be called. A guarantor may be pursued. Property may be claimed if the agreement allows it. The buyer's reputation can fall so sharply that the next merchant refuses him goods, turning one missed payment into the destruction of his business. This is the moment that reveals what really backed ancient credit. It was not the clay. Clay cannot seize an asset or shame a dishonest trader. The backing was the community willing to recognize the writing, the authority willing to hear the dispute, and the network willing to punish default by withdrawing future trust. If witnesses had vanished, if war had destroyed the archive, or if a powerful debtor could ignore the court, the same tablet might become almost worthless. A promise was valuable only inside a functioning social machine. Enforcement also exposed the cruelty hidden inside efficient trade. When debtors failed, consequences could extend beyond a bad entry in an account. Depending on the place, period, and contract, families might lose pledged property, labor, or freedom. It would be wrong to claim that every default ended in bondage, but it would be equally wrong to describe credit as harmless bookkeeping. By bringing the future into the present, credit allowed a crop not yet grown or a cargo not yet sold to finance life today. When that future failed to arrive, creditors could try to take something else from the debtor's future instead. Nor was the system equal. The person who controlled the scale could influence the payment. The institution that defined the unit could shape rents and dues. The scribe who understood the tablet possessed knowledge that an illiterate debtor lacked. Creditors could demand security. Elites could turn standardized accounting into standardized extraction. The same archive that protects a merchant from a false denial can protect a powerful lender's claim against a desperate family. Economic memory is not neutral when some people control what society is allowed to remember. Still, the gains were enormous. Reliable accounts encouraged specialization. A weaver could focus on cloth instead of producing every necessity. A trader could connect tin from one region, textile production from another, and bronze makers somewhere else. Producers could reach people they would never meet. A caravan could contain the labor of households, guides, animal keepers, officials, investors, and agents, coordinated by prices and promises. Trade turned scattered local resources into a connected production system long before a stamped coin appeared. Why, then, were coins eventually so important? By the 7th century BCE, early electrum coins appeared in Western Anatolia, commonly associated with Lydia and neighboring Greek cities. Metal payment itself was not new. The innovation was to stamp pieces in recognizable forms associated with an authority or issuer. Instead of testing every anonymous lump from the beginning, a recipient could accept the stamp as evidence about weight and quality, at least within a community that trusted it. The coin compressed several questions into one object. How much does this weigh? What is it made from? Who stands behind it? Can I offer it to someone else? A recognized coin answered quickly enough that many transactions became cheaper. People could count pieces rather than weigh and test every fragment. Small standardized denominations made some retail exchanges easier. Governments could collect dues and pay soldiers in a consistent form. The authorities' mark made trust more portable. But coins did not create trade, and they did not erase older systems. Weighed bullion continued. Credit continued. Barter continued. Gifts and family obligations continued. Some regions adopted coinage slowly, others developed different monetary traditions. Even where coins became common, large transactions could still depend on accounts, loans, and written orders. The history is not a staircase on which barter occupies the first step, coins the second, and credit the third. These methods overlap, retreat, and reappear according to circumstance. In fact, the deepest innovation behind coinage was not metal. People had valued metal for centuries. It was a public shortcut for verification. A sealed tablet said, "This named person owes that named person under these rules." A coin said, "Whoever holds this recognized object can offer standardized payment without explaining an entire personal history." The tablet carried specific memory. The coin carried generalized trust. One made a distant promise verifiable, the other made value easier to transfer to a stranger. That difference changes who can enter a market. Relationship-based credit favors insiders with families, reputations, and established partners. A newcomer may possess useful goods but lack anyone willing to trust him. Portable currency can reduce that barrier because the seller need not know the buyer's biography. Yet the coin introduces a new dependency. Both sides must trust the issuer, recognize the mark, and believe others will accept it tomorrow. Money does not eliminate trust. It moves trust away from the individual and into a wider system. The same transformation appears in modern payments. Most money today does not travel as notes or coins when a card is tapped or a bank transfer is made. Ledgers change. Institutions recognize claims against one another. Identity is verified, messages are recorded, balances are netted, and final settlement may occur somewhere behind the transaction. The technology is unimaginably faster, but the old questions remain. Who owes what, in which unit, and why should anyone believe the record? Return one final time to the merchant at Kanesh. The buyer has taken the tin. The merchant holds no minted coin. What he holds is evidence of a claim measured in a unit both sides understand. Perhaps part of the price has been weighed in silver, and the remainder is due later. Perhaps an agent will settle it. Perhaps the buyer will default, and witnesses will be summoned. The clay does not guarantee a happy ending. It turns the disagreement into something a commercial community can judge. When payment finally arrives, silver may be placed on a balance rather than counted from a purse. The merchant examines the metal, checks the weight, and closes the account. A receipt can declare the obligation satisfied and block a second demand. The cargo moved first. The money object moved later. Between those moments stood measurement, memory, and law. That interval was where ancient trade lived. So how did people trade before money? They often did not, if by money we mean every shared method of measuring and settling value. They traded before coins, before banknotes, and before universal currencies, but not before obligation, accounting, or trust. They used immediate swaps when useful. They relied on relatives and reciprocity when relationships were strong. They measured value in grain or weighed metal, recorded debts on clay, sealed agreements before witnesses, and carried promises across networks of merchants. The decisive breakthrough was not the invention of one magical object. It was the separation of exchange from immediate settlement. Once a society could say, this cargo is worth this amount, this person owes it, and this record proves it, goods could move even when payment could not. Writing extended memory. Standards extended comparison. Courts extended enforcement. Merchant networks extended reputation. Coins later compressed those achievements into portable pieces that strangers could recognize. Trade did not wait for money to appear from nowhere. Trade helped build the institutions that made money possible. And money did not replace trust. It transformed trust into units, records, and objects that could travel farther than any single human relationship. Before value could be carried in a pocket, it was carried in memory. Before it was stamped on metal, it was pressed into clay. And before strangers could count coins across a table, they first had